Welcome, age of vintage society. Sidney Poitier, the Bahamian-American actor who broke numerous Hollywood barriers in the 1950s and 1960s, most famously in 1964 when he became the first black man to win the Oscar for Best Actor. Why was Sidney Poitier the first who slapped a white man? Make sure to watch the video until the end and leave your thoughts in the comments. If you are new here, join our wonderful community by subscribing to the Age of Vintage channel. Sidney Poitier, the groundbreaking actor and enduring inspiration who transformed how black people were portrayed on screen. Few movie stars, black or white, had such an influence both on and off the screen. Before Poitier, the son of Bahamian tomato farmers, no black actor had a sustained career as a lead performer or could get a film produced based on his own star power. Before Poitier, few black actors were permitted a break from the stereotypes of bug-eyed servants and grinning entertainers. Before Poitier, Hollywood filmmakers rarely even attempted to tell a black person's story. Poitier's rise mirrored profound changes in the country in the 1950s and 60s, as racial attitudes evolved during the civil rights era and segregation laws were challenged and fell. Poitier was the performer to whom a cautious industry turned for stories of progress. He was the escaped black convict who befriends a white prisoner, Tony Curtis, in The Defiant Ones. He was the courtly office worker who falls in love with a blind white girl in A Patch of Blue. He was the handyman in Lilies of the Field, who builds a church for a group of nuns. In one of the great roles of the stage and screen, he was the ambitious young father whose dreams clashed with those of other family members in Lorraine Hansberry's A Raisin in the Sun. Over his career, Poitier was repeatedly the first. He became the first black man to win an International Film Award at the Venice Film Festival in 1957, the first to be nominated for Best Actor at the Academy Awards in 1958, and of course he became the first to win it for Lilies of the Field. I had a sense of responsibility not only to myself and to my time, but certainly to the people I represented, so I was charged with a responsibility to represent them in ways that they would see and say, "Okay, I like that." Sidney Poitier does not make movies, he makes milestones. Poitier not only entertained but enlightened, shifting attitudes, broadening hearts, revealing the power of the silver screen to bring us closer together. Poitier pushed against the typical roles of black men in Hollywood. In 1961's Paris Blues, he played the first black romantic lead in a major picture. Together with Katherine Houghton, he portrayed the first positive depiction of an interracial couple in a major Hollywood film with 1967's Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. In 1968, he became the first black man to be named Hollywood's top box office star. In 1975, he appeared in the first film to take a stance against apartheid, The Wilby Conspiracy. And for 1969's The Lost Man, he demanded that at least half of the film crew be black, the first time such a thing had ever been done. Debates about diversity in Hollywood inevitably turned to the story of Poitier. With his handsome, flawless face, intense stare and disciplined style, he was for years not just the most popular black movie star, but the only one. "I made films when the only other black on the lot was the shoeshine boy," he recalled. "I was kind of the lone guy in town." He was born in Miami on February 20th, 1927. His parents, Evelyn and Reginald Poitier, were from Cat Island in the Bahamas. His parents were tomato farmers who often travelled. They were also visiting Florida to sell produce in between Reginald's job as a cab driver. Poitier was actually born 2 months premature and was so frail that his parents stayed in Miami for 3 extra months to make sure that their baby would survive. He was not expected to live. His mother consulted a palm reader who assuaged her fears. The lady took her hand and started speaking to my mother. "Don't worry about your son, he will survive." And these were her words. She said, "He will walk with kings." He returned to Miami when he was 15 years old, where they figured he would have better opportunities. His father took him to the dock and put $3 in his hand. He said, "Take care of yourself, son," and he turned me around to face the boat, Poitier said. He didn't like Miami and soon headed north to New York, where he tried his hand at acting. It did not go well at first. With limited schooling, he had trouble reading a script. When Poitier moved to New York City, he took work as a dishwasher in various establishments. However, it wasn't until he began practicing musical numbers that he realized he was tone deaf. While he did this, he also learned how to read for the first time in his life. A friendly waiter would regularly sit with him during this time and helped him read the local newspapers. That man, every night, the place is closed, everyone's gone, and he sat there with me week after week after week, and he told me about punctuations, he told me where dots were and what the dots mean here between these two words, all of that stuff. Soon after, he landed work with the theatre, where he took acting lessons, softened his Bahamian accent, and landed a stage role as an understudy to Harry Belafonte. Poitier is only 9 days older than famous musician and actor Harry Belafonte. They both met each other at age 20, before either of them had begun a career in the entertainment industry. Working together on and off over the years, Belafonte and Poitier would remain close friends throughout their equally long lives. This led to roles on Broadway and eventually caught the attention of Hollywood. We should clarify that while No Way Out was Poitier's first credited role in a fictional feature film, it wasn't the first film acting that he had done. It is a noir film in which he played a young doctor who must treat a patient. Not only had he worked uncredited in the film Sepia Cinderella, he had also acted in 3 short films for the US Army when he was enlisted. That led to increasingly prominent roles as a reverend in the apartheid drama Cry the Beloved Country, a troubled student in Blackboard Jungle, and an escaped prisoner in The Defiant Ones, in which he and Tony Curtis were shackled together and forced to get along to survive. With that 1958 film, Poitier became the first black man to be nominated for an Oscar. Becoming one of Hollywood's biggest draws amid the racial tensions in America at the time, his charm, his natural good looks, and silky voice made him a star. But for a dark-skinned actor in the 1950s, finding complex roles was difficult. He refused to take roles he felt were demeaning. Blacks were so new in Hollywood. There was almost no frame of reference for us except as stereotypical one-dimensional characters. I had in mind what was expected of me. Not just what other blacks expected, but what my mother and father expected, and what I expected of myself. Early on, Poitier made a conscious decision to reject roles that weren't consistent with his values or that reflected badly upon his race. He told that as a struggling young actor he turned down a role that paid $750 a week because he didn't like the character, a janitor who didn't respond after thugs killed his daughter and threw her body on his lawn. I could not imagine playing that part, so I said to myself, that's not the kind of work I want. And I told my agent that I couldn't play the role, Poitier said. He said, why can't you play it? There's nothing derogatory about it in racial terms, and I said, I can't do it. He never understood. Still, by the late 1950s, he was landing regular acting work. He appeared in the first Broadway production of A Raisin in the Sun in 1959 and starred in the movie version 2 years later. Then came Lilies of the Field, biblical epic The Greatest Story Ever Told, and the drama A Patch of Blue. During the 1960s he was often paid through an old system called $1 participation. This meant that Poitier would begin getting a cut of the film's profits from the first ticket sold. Depending on how successful his movies were, that would have meant a hefty paycheck, or a terrible one. Spurred by his friendship with the more outspoken Belafonte, he also began embracing the civil rights movement. His activism extended beyond the screen as well. In 1963 he attended the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, where Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. delivered his famous I Have a Dream speech. In 1968 Poitier went back to DC once more to support the Poor People's Campaign, which was organised in part by King before he was assassinated. Then came 1967, and one of the most remarkable years any Hollywood star has had before or since. Poitier starred in 3 high-profile films, starting with To Sir with Love, a British drama about an idealistic teacher who must win over rebellious teenagers in a tough East London school. By this time, Poitier was commanding $1 million a movie, and the filmmakers weren't sure they could afford to hire him, so they struck a deal to pay the actor scale, the minimum legal amount, in exchange for a percentage of the movie's box office grosses. Although common in Hollywood today, it was a radical idea at the time, and a savvy one for Poitier. To Serve with Love became a big hit, earning him a huge payday. Next up was Norman Jewison's In the Heat of the Night, which gave Poitier his most enduring role. He played Virgil Tibbs, a homicide detective passing through Mississippi when he is detained by a bigoted white police chief, Rod Steiger, as a possible suspect in a slaying. Tibbs reluctantly agrees to stay and help solve the case, and the two men eventually find a grudging mutual respect. The movie gave Poitier his most famous line, "They call me Mr. Tibbs," an indignant cry for respect after a demeaning slur by Steiger's character. One of the most famous moments of the film In the Heat of the Night involves Poitier being slapped by a rich old white man, only for him to slap him back in response. "Yes, I knew that I would have been insulting every black person in the world if I hadn't." This scene was unprecedented at the time and shocked audiences nationwide. It remains uncertain whether Poitier improvised that slap on the day of shooting, or whether the slap was originally in the script, but regardless, the scene has rightly been recognised as a watershed moment in Hollywood when it comes to the topic of racial equality. Poitier followed that film with Stanley Kramer's Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, another message movie about racial tolerance in which his doctor character must persuade Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn's characters to let him marry their daughter. The movie was released only 6 months after the Supreme Court made interracial marriage legal in all 50 states. However, around the same time, some black people began grumbling that Poitier's saintly non-sexualized characters bore little resemblance to the complex realities of African American life. Black playwright Clifford Mason, in a 1967 New York Times column, argued that Poitier played essentially the same character in every movie, a good guy in a totally white world, with no wife, no sweetheart, no woman to love or kiss, helping the white man solve the white man's problem. This criticism stung Poitier so much that he retreated to the Bahamas for months. "I lived through people turning on me. It was painful for a couple of years. I was the most successful black actor in the history of the country. The criticism I received was principally because I was usually the only black in the movies. Personally, I thought that was a step forward." In the 1970s, Poitier scaled back on acting and turned to directing, which he felt gave him more control over his film projects. He teamed up with his pal Belafonte for the western Buck and the Preacher, his directorial debut. Although he faded as a box office draw, Poitier continued to appear on screen sporadically into the 1990s. By 2000, Poitier had retired from acting, choosing instead to play golf and pen a memoir in which he described his lifelong attempt to live according to principles instilled in him by his father and others he admired. In his later years, as Hollywood sought to recognise a man whose example had opened doors for so many other black actors, the accolades poured in. If you liked this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you are new here, and if you want to support my work, please visit my Patreon page. Now it is your turn. What do you think about the life and legacy of Sidney Poitier? He commanded the screen and paved the way for countless other black actors.